Welcome back to Started from the Bottom. I am your host, Susan Peterson. Today I'm so excited we have Alexis and Chanté from Let's Talk Sis. Alexis and Chanté of Let's Talk Sis have created an Instagram platform where they seek to bring awareness to difficult topics, specifically race, diversity, and inclusion, to promote dialogue and initiate positive change. They're committed to making change through connection and humanity, one conversation at a time. Both Alexis, whose background is in sociology, and Chante, whose background is in psychology, have spent the last 20 years advocating for youth in a variety of platforms, including inclusion, diversity, education empowerment, safety, leadership, career development, and self-esteem, as well as working diligently to make schools and communities safer. Alexis and Chante have been keynote speakers, presenters, panelists at national and international conferences, and served on the board of international organizations. They have emceed events such as TEDX SLC, spoken and presented at colleges and state educational organizations, at city-town meeting halls, and to mayors and law enforcement. They have written magazine articles, study guides, and sections of published books. They have done consulting and training for businesses and worldwide organizations, and they have created their own workshop. Welcome to Started from the Bottom.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
I'm so excited you said yes.
We're excited too. Of course we said yes.
I know. You guys are so smart, and I'm just really excited to get into it today.
That is my favorite compliment you've ever given me.
Really?
Yeah. You tell me I'm smart.
You are, though.
Thank you.
Do other people miss it?
Yeah. All the time. I actually think that, you know, we're trying to kind of change and shift things culturally as we compliment each other as women.
Yeah.
And I don't hear a lot of women say, "You're so smart."
Oh.
Yeah, so look at you, Susan. I love that compliment.
I feel like it's the first thing I noticed about both of you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Besides your height.
Besides that we're 6 feet tall. Larger than life.
Besides your height, I remember talking to you guys and going away being like, holy crap, they're really smart.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. I love it. I'll take it.
Okay, so now we have a high expectation.
Yes.
Let's go.
Set the bar.
Okay, talk to me about Let's Talk Sis and how you guys got started. Because this is new-ish,
Will we sound smart if we say we started it on accident?
You know what? There are so many reluctant entrepreneurs who've come on this podcast. So, yeah.
Okay, well, it was an accident, really. We honestly weren't really looking for anything. Our lives were busy. Our lives were full.
Because you each have
I have 4 children. I have two boys. My husband's career is really busy. I feel like we've always been involved in community things, kind of always had little side things that we've just, I don't know, always been busy and active in everything that we do. And so we were asked in the height of 2020, when there is just racial tension, so many feelings around politics, and everyone is just trying to figure out how they feel about themselves, how they feel about other people. They don't know who to talk to. You're seeing a lot of things on social media, and it was just hard to process. So we were asked by a friend with a small kind of religious platform to do an interview about our experience.
We said no
in Utah.
Yes. We said no. We just it didn't feel like a safe time to step forward. And we were doing things on a community level. We were in our kids' schools. We were speaking on this, but very close-knit communities. And so when she's like, you know, it's a social media platform, we were like, yeah, no thanks.
Well, anyway, I think we were kind of scared too, because talking about race and even our own lived experiences during that time felt scarier than ever, because we didn't want to hurt or offend or say something. And there were just so many feelings and emotions. We could feel all of it. And I told Chante, I was like, no, like, why would we do that right now? And she's like, it's a friend. Like, I feel like we should say yes.
So we ended up doing it. And it was a 30-minute live interview. We ended up, she's like, you know, we'll get a few hundred people live. We actually had 20,000 live
engaged.
And we went 90 minutes. And people stayed and they stuck with it. And afterwards, people were, you know, writing in, texting in, where do we follow these ladies? And we were like, we don't actually have someplace.
Because you just had your private Instagram.
Right, yes. And it's just pictures of our kids. And like, it was in that moment, I literally pulled out my phone and I started creating another Instagram account.
She turned to me, she said, we're sisters and we talk about everything. Do you like Let's Talk Sis? It was that quick. Yeah.
And I remember after the interview, we were surprised. We're like, people care about this. And the stories and the experiences that we were sharing. And I think, to just give a little context, I mean, growing up in Utah, which, lacks racial diversity.
Yeah, I mean, what?
Being black biracial.
7% of the state is black, or is it less than that?
I honestly don't even know the statistics right now, but it's around that.
Yeah.
And more in like Salt Lake County than Utah County, where we grew up. Yeah. And so we've always been navigating this conversation. And I feel like as children, we were having to step forward and teach and help people understand and explain about our hair or different care, or just explain about our black side of the family and our white side of the family, and creating understanding and kind of building these bridges of connection that I feel like in this moment when we stepped forward, and that's the place we spoke from, so many people were like, oh my goodness. Like there was a 70-year-old woman who were Facebook Live, and she types in and she's like, I'm 70 years old and I've never heard this explained this way in my life. And so we knew that there was a need, but there was no intention of doing anything with it. Right. We were joking like, do you think anyone will even want to come over to this Instagram account?
Thinking we were making this Instagram account, and it was just nothing was going to happen. And that night we went to bed and we had like 200 followers, and we thought, oh, wow, there's some people here. And we woke up the next morning, and I was actually at a doctor's appointment, and she texted me. She's like, look at our Instagram. I was like, 7,000
overnight.
Like overnight. Wow, I guess people want to talk about this, so we better make a video.
And it's so funny. Like you can go back on our account. It's horrible. Like we're like, hi, we're sisters.
We didn't even know how to put a video on Instagram. Literally, our first like concrete video that we made educating, it took us 24 hours to get it up because we didn't know.
Well, and Instagram locked us out because it looked like it wasn't real. The growth was so fast. There was so much interaction, so many DMs. And we're like trying to respond back to all of it that we got locked out. We literally were Googling like just how to use Instagram and all its features because we had never done anything more than posted a picture of our kids. Yeah. And then it was from there we started just thinking, okay, what would we want to share with even friends and family? And during that time, we actually were both getting so many personal calls from people throughout our life that are like looking at these things playing out and all of these racial conversations, and people are calling us wanting to process. They're calling us apologizing for things that they said or did in the past. They're calling us because they have children or grandchildren and they just don't know who to talk to. So in some ways we're like, hey, well, if we have one conversation on Instagram, that saves time. And then we can just tell everybody, hey, we actually made a video about that. So some of it was like, let's just make our life easier because we can't talk to everyone that wants to talk to about all of these things right now.
Yeah. So we started making videos, little 10-minute videos, and we would touch upon, you know, things that parents could talk to their kids about. We tried to stay in a really comfortable, safe zone because things were so contentious in our country. We actually felt fearful going too deep into the conversation. But, you know, we've gradually worked through that, and we do feel more comfortable speaking out on topics now that we didn't 2 years ago. But it really came to a point, people started saying, well, will you come speak here? Will you do this? Will you do that? And that was really fun for a while until all of a sudden, you know, we're traveling. We're in Washington one weekend, Idaho the next weekend. And we're like, we actually can't sustain this. So maybe we'll go into businesses and have this conversation. And that's where we are now. And it's working quite nicely for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. What, talk to me more about your growing up years and then also through college and how you guys have, I know we've had this conversation, but pretend like we haven't. I don't know, but just about how what you did in college prepared you for this. Like, I feel like you guys have been working towards this without realizing it for a long time.
That's true.
Yes. And I think some people just think we appeared and all of this happened, but they don't see the years of just experience that we've had in these areas. I feel like, first of all, like growing up, my father passed away when I was 2 and my mom was pregnant with Chante. So this is like, you know, 80s. This is during the 80s. And even during that time, you have to understand that like biracial relationships, mixed race couples are not as well accepted as they are now. So I feel like my parents
nationwide, right?
Yes, nationwide.
Right. And then specifically in Utah, it was.
Yes, and we were in California.
Oh, so, you guys were in California. Okay.
Yes, so that's where we lived. And my mom has stories about people yelling things at her throwing bottles at both she and my dad, people even trying to rip their hands apart if they were holding hands. You know, we have a half brother, just like there were a lot of things that people didn't like and weren't okay with. And that was in California. So then my dad gets really sick, and my dad is an immigrant from Jamaica. And so there's that kind of cultural difference also, but still enslaved ancestry. And that has been really interesting for us to kind of dig into and digest also. And that's another topic. But so then we live in Idaho. My dad passes away. Chanté's born 2 months later. And my mom decides to move to Utah. And I don't think that she was prepared either for what it would look like being a blonde woman, very Scandinavian looking, green eyes, with 2 little black children.
And single at that.
Yes.
Right.
And so just the questions and the assumptions that were made about her. But I feel like, you know, back then they weren't having conversations like preparing white parents to raise black children in America, that she had to figure a lot of it out. And I feel like she did a really good job. And she also taught us at a young age that there were going to be perceptions that people would have about us, and that we were going to constantly have to rise and to prove them wrong and not let that affect us, which, you know, in theory is great, but it still does affect you, and it is painful and hard. And I think even back then we didn't have language surrounding some of this. So a lot of it is you're just feeling it and you're like, that felt off.
Right. You're absorbing these microaggressions and these negative encounters, and you start to internalize it as something wrong with yourself because you don't have the language to say, oh, actually, that was inappropriate what they did. And that was because of their ignorance about me. And so you internalize all of that, and it creates this belief of who you are that's really, really not accurate. And I think we both had to navigate that for a while. I really identified in my blackness very young, and I don't know that you did as much.
I feel like I looked more racially ambiguous. So people thought I was Puerto Rican, Dominican, Polynesian, from an island. So I felt like I could kind of navigate and be whatever, which now I have more understanding that that was like a coping mechanism. And that actually provided me more safety because of some people's feelings that really are rooted in anti-blackness. And I mean, to go deeper in that and understand kind of historically why those beliefs exist. But it was an interesting time to navigate. And it's tricky because we had wonderful, beautiful experiences. We had incredible people in our life that loved us and saw us for who we were. But then there were also these experiences where we were judged, treated differently, called the N-word, you know, lots of difficult things, but we didn't always have the safe space to process that. So we felt like we had to tuck it away and save it for later. And I think that as we started getting more involved in high school, I started working with a nonprofit organization that was based out of Washington, D.C. And this was just kind of this crazy thing that happened where they came to our school. It was right at the beginning of school shootings. And they wanted to try to test and pilot this program in the West Coast because they only had these programs in schools like in the South and in the East. So I was selected to go through this training and then try to implement it in our school. And after they asked me to write an essay about my experience and what I learned, and I just wrote an essay. And then after a few weeks, we got a call, and they called and asked my mom if I could represent the Western United States as a youth delegate on this national board. So I started flying to Washington, D.C. I started going to board meetings. And
in high school?
In high school.
She was like 16. I remember being home. I mean, we're 2 years apart. So I was 14, and I remember watching her on C-SPAN at 14, you know, years old. And I jumped into this whole, you know, the nonprofit organization and the youth boards and things like that, just really because I wanted to follow in her footsteps and do everything she did. But we didn't realize at the time that advocating for youth, advocating for our peers was really training us in so many ways that we had no idea we would use in the future. But I mean, I was 17 when I first spoke at the U.S. Department of Education's national conference. And I think you spoke at that a number of times. And we just did it. We saw that there were issues. We were trained in these issues. And we had no reservation about standing up in front of 10,000 people and speaking on those issues at 16, 17 years old.
Well, and I think we felt it was an honor to represent young people. And in the rooms, like I even think back and I'm like, oh my goodness, I stayed one weekend with this lobbyist. She took me all around. She introduced me to everyone. We spent the whole a few days on the Hill. Like then I'm with a Secret Service agent and he's showing me all these tricks and back doors and all these fun secret things. And it was just such a cool thing to see how you can change policy and just even the skill set that you need to be able to advocate for these things that affect real life people. And I think sometimes there's a disconnect because you see these issues that happen and that people deal with every day, but you at a young age, you don't get to see those people that are working hard to make policy change to support so many people that never even have those opportunities. And we were working with youth. Eventually, the organization went international, so all over the world. And so we're hearing and seeing these stories, and then we get in the rooms and sometimes connect these dots.
Yeah.
And that was so incredible for us, and it was so fun, too. And I think even like growing up as Black girls in Utah, where I think the definition of beauty is very small, where we didn't get a lot of attention. I mean, from old people, they say you guys are beautiful.
Your grandmas would tell us how pretty we were, but
not like the boys. And then we go to Miami and DC, and we did not even know how to navigate. It was wild, but it was also so good for our self-confidence to see that, like, yeah, the definition of that here is one thing, but we go there, and it was like my mom was having to call hotels and say, leave these young girls alone, quit having the bellhops, the workers go up, ask for their number, want to take them out for drinks. Like we were young, we were in high school, but we also looked old.
Yeah.
So there were just so many learning experiences, and we did that for years. I mean, we were well into college as we were still spending a big portion of the year in DC and Miami. We went to Jamaica and did some work with the U.S. Embassy and some different groups there. And it was just awesome. And we learned so much.
Then we got married and we're like, well, let's be stay-at-home moms and have kids. That was a nice portion of our life. And we're going to move to the next piece. Little did we know.
Little did you know.
Yeah.
So then you became stay-at-home moms.
Yeah. And then really, you know, well, let me jump back. So Alexis married a Black man from the South.
Yeah.
I married a white man from the Midwest. And we had no idea what those decisions, how they would shift our racial reality and our lived experience. So we start having children. Her children are beautiful Black children. My children are white assumed. When I'm not present, you would just think that they were white, right? And so we were made aware of the disparities here very young in our lives, but it became put under like a magnifying glass when we had children. And we saw that her children were dealing with things that my children, it didn't even touch them. And so, you know, early on in our motherhood, we were going into schools and, you know, really on a community level, trying to help make changes. You know, we did an assembly right before, you know, 2020 and everything got really crazy. But it wasn't until this interview and everything changed. And all of a sudden we have people wanting us to speak on this. And it's like, okay, yes, we actually were public speakers, but now we don't really even have anything to wear besides our Costco sweats. And we didn't, it was really shifting our mindset back to, we are capable of doing this. We've done it before. We've just been in a different phase of life for so long.
Yeah. We can take this out, but how was it? Because you said you grew up kind of racially ambiguous, and you said you accept. I pointed to Alexis for that. Now I'm pointing to Chante and saying you said you grew up accepting your Blackness, and then kind of your roles switched as you became mothers a little bit. Not that you're turning your back on your Blackness, but your children are having a racially ambiguous experience.
Yeah.
How
has that flip been?
It has been fascinating.
So interesting.
And I think it's hard for people who have known me my whole life because I do identify as Black. Yeah. I am a Black mother of Black children.
Yeah.
And I feel like for my children, that is important.
Yeah.
And I feel like what I've had to learn and even recognize in myself and my past experiences of even sometimes knowing it was easier to be exotic or to be connected to Jamaica as an island. And I think even understanding that when enslaved people were dispersed all over the world some ships went to the United States, some ships went to South America, some went to Jamaica, but our ancestors are all the same. And those who have come from enslaved people, a lot of their genetic background is similar. So my family from the South, well, my husband's family from the South, my in-laws, and our Chante and I, we are from the same places in West Africa when you look at our genetics.
Oh, interesting.
And I think that as a young girl, you could separate exotic island of Jamaica. That's different. People probably will be a little nicer to you than if you're American Black. But I think understanding that too, it's like we had the same ancestors. And when you understand slavery in Jamaica and the similarities and even some of the things that were even more inhumane in Jamaica than in the United States, it really does connect you. And it's like, yeah, that is who I am. And I feel like that has been important, and it's provided this just humility and awareness where we're a Black family. I'm a Black mom, and I actually am shocked when people are confused about my racial background, because in my mind, it's who I am, but I also hold a lot of space for my white ancestors. And I feel like the family that we grew up in, like that has always been instilled in us, like the stories, the genealogy, like we have this strong sense of self with our Danish Mountain West pioneer ancestry, and we're proud of it. And I think sometimes that is such a good touch point when we speak, is we have love and deep connection and roots for that part of us, as well as the African part that came from enslaved people.
Yeah.
And there's even similarities of resilience and overcoming hard things, but then there are very different specific challenges. And I really feel like I've had to learn that on such a deeper level to raise Black children today that love themselves and can process through some of the things that are said to them and some of the ways that they are treated, and still at the end of the day recognize that that's more about the person who said it than about their own worth and value. Mm-hmm. But even with all of the understanding and context and words and psychological safety, I can't undo some of the situations that my children experience because of the environment that they are in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because as a little girl, I really had the choice to either identify as Black or sink into insecurity, because no one questioned that I was anything else. I had a lot more melanin than Alexis did, just even my features alone as a child. And I connected a lot to Black culture, at least the teeny bit that I could access in my life, the dance, the music. I wanted to be a rapper by the time I was 9. And I actually was pretty good at it.
Freestyle right now, go.
Oh, stop. But I mean, even as a dancer, I picked up really quickly on more dance styles that connected more with the Black community. Hip hop, I was really good at it, and it actually benefited me to be the Black girl. And so I connected to that piece of who I was so deeply as a young child. And it's interesting how it plays out now, because my children are white assumed, and my oldest, with his light sandy brown hair and blue eyes, he actually identifies as Black. And it's been a really interesting thing to navigate. And as a mom, I panic a little bit because I'm like, everyone sees you as white. How are we going to handle this? And we were talking the other day. He's like, I would love to go to an HBCU, and I was like, oh,
he's
boy.
He's 9, by the way.
He is, and he's very smart. But it's interesting because as he realizes, and we have conversations of the things his cousins experience that he doesn't experience, he feels a really deep responsibility to help change conversation, to be that protector. Like we just had the conversation for his plan of action if he hears the N-word at school, what he's going to do. And so he's very aware, but it's been interesting to navigate because I do still identify as a Black woman, and my children have absorbed so much. And I mean, their cousins are pretty much second siblings for them. Yeah. And so they're immersed in Alexis's family. And that identification is a really interesting thing to watch how it's playing out now.
I think it's fun. Is that bad?
No, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's really admirable how you guys are raising your kids together. I've seen a little corner, tiny bit of it, but like you feel like each other's kids are your own.
Absolutely.
Yes.
100%.
And it's been a blessing, I think, to both of our families.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
Okay. What is the scrappiest thing you guys have done?
I still can't.
It's so funny.
Oh,
because
you got an answer. Good.
I
I'll
don't
let you
know
go
if
for
I
it.
really do, because I've been thinking about this really, where I'm just like, so much of our business, our platform was just built figuring it out, you know, where it's like we had been changing diapers, feeding babies, growing babies. It seemed like for a decade.
It was.
For so much. It was that just everything felt almost scrappy and terrifying, where it's like, honestly, we were budgeting down to the penny, and now we're speaking on big stages and we don't know what to wear. And we're trying to like piece things where we're like, this looks horrible, but maybe if we throw in a blazer, or like our Walmart makeup bags where we're doing in the car lighting and mid daylight and like trying to, I don't know, make us look just presentable. And I feel like everything, it feels like to us,
like it's been a scrappy journey.
Yeah.
Honestly, more than just like one incident. It's like, I mean, our FedEx, Susan, you came and saw us there.
I was at your FedEx.
We were doing our makeup at FedEx, trying to figure out how to print programs.
And punching.
Well, we haven't done some of this stuff since college. So, you know, I'm like, resizing? Wait, do I even know how to use Microsoft Word in the most current version? Like, you know, and I'm asking for help, and it just, the learning curve, and we were capable, but it all just felt scrappy. And just, there were so many of the women along the way, and even men that were mentoring us and helping us just piece it together as we went. And so it's really cool looking back on every single person that believed in us and helped connect us to someone else that connected us to someone else. And it still feels scrappy, I feel like, right now.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you guys are in the scrap.
We're in it.
I love it. I feel like scrappy is, for me, and I maybe should have given you this definition, but I love your answer. I think it's perfect. It's like when an opportunity comes and you're either not prepared for it or don't fill up to the task, and you figure out how to get it done.
Yeah, well, I would say that would have been emceeing for TEDx Salt Lake City and not having our cue cards. And between each speaker that we had to introduce, we were backstage with a glue stick trying to glue on what we read next. And literally on stage, like lights, camera, go, we would realize we had the wrong cue card, the two of us, and we would just in the moment like, okay, I'm Alexis right now, and I'm just going to follow this teleprompter, and you know, and so
and it wasn't correct. Like, they changed the order, so what was on the teleprompter was not the person there,
right?
And we're like just winging it, like trying to introduce them as our friends, and we know some of them have these like credentials that we need to say, and I do feel like that was so scrappy, the whole experience.
Yeah.
Well, like I had a glue stick tucked down my shirt because I knew I only had like 30 seconds in between people. So it's like you run off, you hurry and glue the next, you know.
Yeah.
So we could actually have a cue
card. And I feel like that is what everything we do feels like.
Everything.
Though. Because even some of the learning curve, like with cue cards, I don't know. I've never used cue cards before this time of my life.
Right.
And just acting like we know what we're doing and we're going to figure it out. And if they get out of order, then we'll go with it.
Well, I think you guys are the queens of, okay, we'll do it. Like I took Alexis to a Silicon Slopes event,
Susan,
and I was like, let's go. I'm just going to introduce you to everyone I know, which we got it done in like a couple hours.
Yes. Well, okay. I have to say, from my perspective, we're like driving up, hanging out, and literally we're walking in, and she's like, okay, give me your elevator pitch. And I'm like, what? And you're like, just tell me, what are you going to tell people?
Yeah.
And I do it. And you guys, I don't even know if I really even knew what an elevator pitch was. And then you tell me to like tweak a couple things. And you're like, okay, you're good. Let's go. And then we're really in the door. And she's like, this is my friend Alexis. She's building this business, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, go time. And I remember the first couple times, like literally feeling like my knees were going to give out and I was going to fall over. And you just like, you were so confident in me.
Yeah.
That I felt confident in myself, and it just kept going and going. And by the end, I was like, oh, I think I fine-tuned this elevator pitch thing. Now I know what it is. And I think I know what is clicking with people and what they're wanting to hear and what parts they're not wanting to hear. And I literally learned that in a matter of hours with you.
Well, okay, so an elevator pitch is something that you can tell your business from when you get on the elevator till you get off on the 30th floor.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you know.
And now we know.
And the point is, exactly what you said is that you're live editing it, and you're seeing how people are responding and going, okay, that's no longer important, but this is, so I'm going to lean more into that.
Yes.
And you just fine tune it. Really, there's no other way to get good at it than just to tell it in a short amount of time to a lot of people.
I agree. Well, and I feel like there's no way anyone could have prepared me for that day with you, Susan. You were unreal, by the way. And you know everyone, and you hang with the big boys. It's so cool to watch you just navigate those spaces that I'm like, it could have taken me 10 years to try to figure out my elevator pitch, but to be thrown in, and then it's like you're building your parachute on the way down.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah. But I actually feel like that's what people connect to us on that level, because we're not afraid to share that piece with people.
Yep.
And to say, we actually learned how to do that on camera.
Yeah.
And there was a learning curve, but people really connect to that because we're not great and brilliant every time we step into something new. We're just not afraid to mess up.
Yes. And we keep getting better and better.
Yeah.
And that's exciting.
Where does the courage come from?
I'll tell you. Let me start here.
Okay.
Alexis, period.
Really?
Like, I am actually an introvert. And I say our relationship's a little bit like Lucy and Ethel, if you've ever watched I Love Lucy, where I'm digging my heels in, and then finally like, okay, fine, we'll do it. And I'm terrified the whole time, but she just has this like, well, we'll never know unless we try. And she doesn't say no to people. And it's honestly been what has catapulted our business. But at the same time, I'm holding on for dear life every day, every single day.
Well, and I don't feel like I can say it's just this great trait that I have and I'm fearless. No, I think I jump first and think later.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
Actually,
she jumps holding on to me.
Yeah. And I'm like, come on, Chante, this will be fun.
And I'm thinking the whole way down, but
we're going to die. We're going to die. We're going to die.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm like, this is so awesome. And it actually is working way better than I thought it would.
It's a fun dynamic that we have, you know.
I love it. I love how you guys not only build conversations, but allow conversations to happen around you. Like, I've come to you with questions before, and your response is always, that's a very interesting question. And so it just feels like, talk to me about how you guys, what do you call it? You create psychological safety for people.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
It's really hard with this conversation specifically.
With race?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Because there is so much unknown and that is not socially acceptable to talk about that can actually hurt people if talked about a certain way. But yet people who want to be a part of the conversation are like, what are the rules? They seem invisible. What's right or wrong? What's going to offend someone or not? So they're scared. And I think that safety and ability to ask questions, but also be able to read who you're talking to, have some context, and step forward, you know, with compassion and really trying to prioritize the person is really, really important. But psychological safety is important in everything, especially in business.
Well, I've never been offended by a question because I feel like every question comes from a lived experience, and people have lived different experiences. They have different perspectives, and every question is a step forward. I think it's a door to a conversation that's going to help someone grow in a way that they're not going to go back to a previous way of thinking. And I mean, unless that previous way of thinking was beneficial, but in talking about race, when sometimes our lack of knowledge can create harmful beliefs, those questions are just doorways. And I love every single question we get.
Well, and I think you have to recognize what is a question and what is kind of disguised as a question. That's a statement to prove a point.
Right. And that does happen.
And that does. It really is tricky. But when people are asking a sincere question and you can sense that they have an open heart, and you also have to recognize you have to set your own boundaries, because there are times I will say, yeah, let me give you a little bit. And then here's a great resource to go learn more. And then let's talk more about this. that it's tricky because I know people are afraid to ask questions. They don't know where to go. And then there's also this belief where people say, well, like my one Black friend said this, so this must be how all Black people feel. Right. And that is really not a great way to approach any topic, is think that one person is the expert end all be all to anything. And so it is important that I feel like we're trying to help connect that we can have different lived experiences and even be the same race, the same gender, and those experiences can be different and valid.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think most of the podcast listeners are, you don't get great stats with podcasts. So I'm going out on a limb here, but I think most of them are parents. And I know you guys started as talking to your kids about race.
Yeah.
And we are going to put this out before the end of Black History Month. So what is something you wish everyone would talk to their kids about?
I think the concept of race itself, because we're so standoffish, like we're going to say something wrong. But the reality is children are looking at the world from the second they're born, but they're internalizing the world as early as 6 months old, right? And they are seeing these differences. And so when we don't talk about it, when we don't talk about diversity, when we don't make it a comfortable conversation, they will learn things elsewhere. And it's usually not a good place. And so it's almost like sex, talking about sex at home, where if you never mention it and it's something that's scary to talk about, where are your kids going to learn about it? Yeah. Well, that's not where we want them to go. And so making these conversations comfortable, but also kids are really simple and concrete in how they learn. So the concept of melanin was a really easy way for me to introduce things to my children. Like, it's biology and it's geography. You know, the closer to the equator, we had to have more protection from the sun. That's what melanin offered us. And the countries that are further away, they didn't need that. And their skin is lighter because they don't have as much melanin. And so when we really make these things, we add clarity for kids, they're less likely to put labels and have disconnect when they're at school, when they're in their, normal play environments. They accept it as this, oh, that's just how the world works. That's simple.
Yeah, because the truth of the matter is, whether you're talking about race at home or not, your children are hearing you talk about it.
They are.
Or not talking about it. And they're wondering
teacher.
Why.
Well, and not only that, I feel like, Alexis, you've had issues where your children have been called the N-word at school, and that doesn't just come as a child built into you.
Right.
No, and I think that right now with social media and how early kids have access to the internet, they're hearing things. They're hearing things on the news. They're hearing their parents talk about things. They're also hearing things on social media. And I think that even in school, sometimes there's books that we read from a different time in history, and people aren't explaining the meaning, the definitions, how dehumanizing it is, and why we don't use it anymore. Right. That kids are just... I don't think they fully understand the impact of what they're saying. And I do believe that there is a teaching opportunity. And it's so interesting because I feel like this conversation to most people feels advanced. But I think, like what Chante said, starting with melanin, geography, biology,
when they're like
family history,
preschool, like that's a really early conversation.
Even just like the people in your family that have dark hair versus light hair, and even amongst Caucasian people, there are different shades and tones of skin.
Freckles are melanin.
Yes, and they have a purpose. And so I think that finding an entry-level place to start the conversation and keeping it going always and making it safe. And when there was a research study that they did where they interviewed kids and they asked them, how do your parents feel about this specific race? And the kids, their answers were shocking. Like, the parents were horrified.
Yeah.
Because they said, oh, my mom doesn't like Black people because whenever I talk about them, she tells me to be quiet. Or we've never had any Black people over to our house, so she must not like them.
Got it. So like, they're learning even when you're not talking.
Yes, because they're categorizing the world around them. And I think when you're talking about like the diversity in nature, we're not putting a hierarchy of value on the yellow flowers and the pink flowers. They're all beautiful flowers. And to make a bouquet, we want all of them. Yeah. And it's wonderful and important. And I think that there's children's books. I think traveling. I think learning about different places, different parts of the country, I think also even expanding your own social circle. And that's one thing when we go in and talk to groups of women that just in like a very kind of women-centered, empowering environment, we talk about diversifying your social circle and about the benefits, the health benefits, and all of the important parts and pieces of it, because as parents, we really are modeling everything for our kids. And what we do or don't do is teaching them something, and then they are deciding the why. And if we don't talk about it, their why may be very different than what we want them to come with that and understand.
I love that. How do you guys deal with people misunderstanding you?
So this is funny, Susan, because this world, there's a lot of feelings right now, especially around what we talk about. And we try to hold space for a lot of different views. And we feel like right now, politics are making this conversation almost impossible. And so we have to speak in a way where sometimes it may sound more neutral than what we are, just because we're trying to create a touch point from where we can start and build from and where we can create understanding. But depending on where you are, you can take it any way that you want. And I feel like there are times where like, oh my goodness, that is not what we were trying to say. And it can be very frustrating because these are really important topics to us.
I think we've both learned that there are many definitions to the words that we use in this conversation. Like even racism, for example. You know, some people think of racism as hate crimes. We think of racism as, you know, a power construct along with prejudice. And so what we're learning is that before we have these conversations, we put out our definitions. Here's what we're talking about when we say this, because if we're thinking two different things, and I'm talking about racism as power and prejudice, and someone else is thinking hate crimes, we're being misunderstood on a whole bunch of levels, and we can't even move forward in the conversation. And so both Alexis and I, not only have we learned to really define things as we speak, but also to try and create language, maybe different words that have similar meanings that can be less triggering for people, and really find more of common ground in language. But it's something that happens. We're misunderstood. It's frustrating. I think it helps to actually have like an Instagram platform where you can get on stories and say, you know what, this is actually what I was meaning by this, and, you know, kind of talk through it out loud.
I think sometimes I've experienced not misunderstanding like this at all, but people have misunderstood me. And I'm like, there are some times where you can pull it back and people are like, oh, got it. I understand it now. Yeah. And then there's sometimes where people are committed to misunderstanding you and you just kind of have to let that one go.
Well, and sometimes people hear what they want to hear in anything.
Yeah.
And I feel like with this topic also, if you were coming in from one very strong political view, you are going to hear some of the things that we say from that lens. And someone can be coming in from another very strong political view, and they're going to hear the things that we say from that lens. And so we are constantly trying to define, and then we can look at someone, and this is only in personal conversations where we can actually stop in real time and say, hey, you know, it seemed like there's a little disconnect with that. Like, what is the meaning that you are thinking? And let me define where I'm coming from, and let's sit and talk through that. But that doesn't always happen in every situation. And I think that just as women in business, and I think you can relate to this, you are going to be misunderstood.
100%.
And people are not going to like what you're doing, and they're going to have feelings about it. And that's been hard because I think that we both have a strong people-pleasing side to us.
We're learning our emotional boundaries and what we can take in, and knowing that we can do our best at expressing ourselves and communicating. And like you said, some people are committed to misunderstanding, and that is out of our control. And so we just keep doing our best. And it's been a learning curve because in the beginning, it affected us a lot when people would, you know, misconstrue our words. And now we're kind of in a place where we can take it in as much as we can. We can learn from the experience and then emotionally move on.
Yeah. And I always will catalog it as like, then you can recognize it sooner. Like, okay, I'm going down a road where someone's going to misunderstand me. I'm going to pull out before I give too much of myself.
Yep.
Okay. What is one lesson you guys learned early on that is still true today?
Oh, that's a great question.
I'm like, one lesson. I feel like we have all this. Every time we do something, we're like, okay, never again that. Oh, we learned there. But I do feel like for me, it's like I can only give what I can give, and I don't owe anyone anything. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we fit in this space where we show up very giving, and we really want to make improvement.
You guys are kind of, you are influencers a little bit.
Yeah, and with our social media, it is, and it's
because
it's
you're
tricky.
Giving so much.
It's true, but I feel like we're trying to figure out the boundaries of like showing up and giving what we can, and being okay to not give more, and being able to recognize and identify those situations faster, that it's not worth our emotional time or energy, honestly.
Yeah.
I found at the beginning I would get really angry because I felt like there was so many issues, people pushing back on the conversation that we would have, and I would internalize that. And now I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is taking a step back and just trying to see the individual and recognize where they're coming from and maybe why they have the perspective that they have, and knowing that their perspective doesn't counter mine. And it's really given me permission to not feel the intense emotion around the pushback that we get, and be able to kind of sit with it. One of our good friends, Desmond, always says, people have problems, people aren't the problem. And that's something that has been really helpful for me, as opposed, to focus on the person and not take in maybe what they're giving. You know?
Okay. So then what is some advice you guys would give either people starting out or you yourselves like 3 years ago?
I feel like this is such an overused term now, but it's so real. It's just like boundaries in everything that you do, and having the confidence to communicate those boundaries. Mm-hmm. And it's hard because I feel like even just as women, we're givers. Yeah. We're always giving of ourselves, and we're always wanting to help and to serve. And I feel like that it can't be endless. Like, when do you cut it off? And I think that we've seen people that we know and love give so much, it has destroyed their health, their mental health. It can hurt relationships. And we've seen ourselves trending down that path. And I think that everyone who probably enters in and builds a business, is an entrepreneur, has to figure that out at some point. And I think that my advice is to be brave enough and surround yourself with people that can model that so you can learn it, because the faster you learn it, the more just successful that you'll be, and you won't have to give your whole everything to something that may not be worth it in the long run. And I feel like relationships, just so many of these things that we talk about now that we used to not, like, they're so valuable and so important. And if we run on empty all the time, which I'm totally preaching to myself right now.
I'm preaching to both of
us. We're in an empty phase right now. It's just been so busy and so intense. But I feel like when I see women, and I see you do this, Susan, where you're like, I need to be in bed by this time. And in order for me to do what I need to do, like, this has got to happen. And it's like, we respect that. And it's never like, Susan, stay longer, we miss you. Yeah. It's just like, look at Susan and you probably had to learn that. I bet that didn't come in the beginning, but that is so powerful for us to see that we've got to create that in order to keep going and doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. Boundaries have been a lesson that I wish we would have known more about in the beginning. For me also, it's just been being comfortable in the hard lessons, being comfortable making mistakes and knowing that every mistake is going to get us to a better place. It's literally a lesson learned, and not being fearful of it anymore, but just in a place of acceptance. And I think that is really true to the conversations that we have, and people being fearful to step in. What if I make a mistake? What if I say something wrong? Well, you will. We all will. We're all learning. And it's just being brave enough to go for it, because it's more important than not.
I think that if you can get to the point where you're not scared of making a mistake, which with every new thing you try, it's there.
Yeah.
You can fast track progress.
Well, you can. I mean, I'm a dance teacher and I watch the people who go all the way. The people, my students that I'm watching on like, So You Think You Can Dance right now, they were the ones in the classroom that just went for it. They didn't even think before. They're like, oh, I'm just going to try it. And that really applies to life. Like, you just try.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen?
And when you go full out, like... I don't dance anymore, but even in like a Zumba class, like you see those women that they don't care who is watching and around, and they're doing it for something bigger than themselves, and they don't care if they make a mistake, and the way they recover and
it's
that
not
confidence.
For show. It's for internal growth. That's the difference.
When you go full out, you build momentum, and then the mistakes become a feedback loop instead of something to be afraid of. And you just quickly like, oh, okay, I got to do that different next time. Got to do it different. Oh, and then you can make bigger like strides towards becoming better.
100%.
Well, and I think that even with that being said, like the mistakes suck. Like they hurt. And especially the more public and the more you grow and the more you're known, like it is sometimes you're like, will I recover from this? And then I feel like just even having great mentors and even you, Susan, it's like, you are so great at saying like, you're going to make mistakes. And like, you think this is something now, you just wait till you're more into it. But it is almost exhilarating to see those people that can navigate through those mistakes and keep going, because going into anything blindly is really scary. But I think knowing that mistakes are a part of the journey.
Yeah.
Most of the time, you're the only one who can pick it out too.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
It is so true. I listen back to my first episodes of my podcast and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so bad.
And no one else is thinking that.
No one's thinking it. My dad picked it up on the first one, which it was helpful. We love feedback, but now the mistakes are so nuanced. No one could pick them up, but I hear them. Abby hears them. My husband hears them. But I think it's just make mistakes. Yes, I love these. I love boundaries and mistakes. Good job. That comes from wisdom. Lived.
Well, thank
Lived
you.
experience.
Lived experience. Okay, we're going to do some rapid fire questions. Who's boss here?
Oh, Alexis.
I disagree.
Stop.
You have a subtle undertone, scary bossy that is way worse than my like chatter. Okay, do this, do this, do this. She literally, like when we were young, people were afraid of her because she's like this silent cobra that will just strike. And you're not expecting it because she is a little bit more of an observer.
Yeah.
But when she does, it like will make people shake and quiver.
So Alexis bossing you into being bossy.
Yeah, but really though, if you were to ask anyone, they would say Alexis.
What would your kids say?
Alexis?
No.
We actually just
What
had
would
this
your husband say?
conversation.
I'm outwardly bossy. She's inwardly scary, subtly
Do you
bossy.
feel like sometimes Chante bosses you into being bossy for her?
Oh, that's an interesting
That is
question.
really interesting because we do have big sister, little sister dynamics.
Yeah.
And so there are times where she's like, I do not have to do what you tell me to do. I'm like, yeah, you do. I'm the big sister, you know?
But does sometimes she make you tell other people to do stuff because she doesn't want to?
Yeah,
So
totally.
All the time.
You boss her into being bossy.
She does.
That's true. That's a good observation, Susan. Yes, because
You
Alexis,
do. You make me have the hard, scary conversations.
totally. Yeah, I can admit to that for
Yeah.
sure. But I always preface it with like, but you're better at this. So
So
you
she
go in and use your
tricks me
strength and
into
I will just
doing it.
support you.
So you're a better negotiator, Chante.
that might be true. Subtly.
Okay.
I'm a better subtle negotiator.
Okay.
Well, it is funny. Like, we'll joke about this. We'll be like on a call or in a conversation, and Chante's just pretty quiet. And then suddenly she's just like, huh? And it's so direct and to the point. And she's summed everything up and connected it all that it's just like, oh, well, there we have it.
That's
right
it.
there.
I love it. Okay, these are not going to be rapid fire. It's fine.
I'm sorry.
We talk a lot.
I love it. It's my favorite thing. Who's more organized?
That's a great question. I think neither. It's funny. I used to be really organized, and life circumstances has made it that it's not really my strong suit anymore. And Alexis has always been like this creative butterfly. And so we're both really free spirited. And we were trying to tell our assistant that we are just, we just kind of fly with the wind where the wind takes us. And she was like, oh yeah, I'm like that too. And it took her maybe one meeting with us to realize, she's like, I'm nothing like you guys.
But still, overall, Chante is more structured and organized, and she really likes to know the plan.
I do. I have to have a plan.
And sometimes plans feel restrictive to me, and I feel like a caged bird, and it just is really hard. But we have to figure it out. Like, we have to stick to plans, and sometimes I have to feel caged in order for things to work. And I think we're starting to learn better of when to like let me fly and do my thing, and then when we have to pull back. And so I think both of our strengths in that area really balance each other out.
You guys really are yin and yang.
It's weird.
We are like two parts to a whole.
Yeah.
Do you feel like growing up, you maybe like instinctively recognize this and would develop characteristics outside of the other person's weakness?
Absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we still do.
For like, because you had it for like survival's sake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very awesome.
We're like kind of sister wives, Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I bet your husbands would love that.
They would die. We already live like 6 blocks apart, and I think they'd die.
Who's nicer?
Oh,
that is really a good question.
these are hard questions, Susan.
I know.
I think we're both, I don't know that you can say who's nicer. I think it's just different and different circumstances. Like sometimes Alexis is going to take the more mothering, nurturing role, and I'm like raging angry, and then sometimes it flips.
Yeah.
But usually we balance each other. Usually
we're never the same way at the same time.
Someone can be angry, someone can be kind, and then it can switch. We
Good
give each
cop,
other
bad
turns.
cop.
Yeah.
Who's scarier?
Who's scarier? Well,
I think Chante is, and you probably think I am.
let me say, I don't think you can say who's scarier. It's just different. It's like I'm the mom that gives that look of death, and the kids know like, oh, we don't do that. And Alexis is the mom that's like has so much to say about it that the kids are like, oh no, we know we don't do that. So it's just different, scary.
Got it.
Yeah.
It is. And I do think that every once in a while, Chante will appear, like even in our business, where I think people are like totally intimidated and a little bit scared. But then there's times I think I do offer that, but I do think I'm a lot more, I'm easy to read. And this is what we're recognizing, is that sometimes the intimidation and the scary factor is because people are watching Chante trying to read her. And I give so much that people are like, oh, we totally know. We can always read Alexis. We know when she's excited and happy, and we know when she's not. But Chante is a little more.
I'm more reserved.
She's more reserved.
Observer, so people aren't sure. Is she ticked or is she just watching? You know.
Alexis, are you a verbal processor?
Totally.
Chante, what about you?
I have to just sit and
You're an
ponder.
internal.
It's all internal for me. And so that's why sometimes I do look maybe upset in meetings, because I'm like taking in information and processing. And Alexis, she processes by opening her mouth.
Yep.
So she speaks her process.
So I just saw this thing on TikTok. I was going to tell you guys I read it, but I didn't.
That's the best.
But I had seen it somewhere before, like in a psychology book, that people process 4 seconds of silence as rejection.
Okay, that's new to me. That says a lot.
When you're in a conversation. And I'm a verbal processor, and I notice that if I just sit and count to 4 before I start processing, I don't know what it is, but it makes me a better negotiator. Just as a little pro tip.
And that's amazing. That's actually really good.
And that's probably why people think of you as like a little harder to read, because you're processing, and they're like, oh, 1, 2. They're processing like the seconds as rejection.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Facts like that.
I feel like my process is like, okay, let's look at kind of 2 opposing sides of it, and let's paint the picture really quick. And then let's figure out where we want to land.
She speaks it. She speaks every bit of it.
Yeah. You speak it. So I'm telling you, just start counting to 4 before you do that.
Well, and you know what's going to happen, Susan?
What?
I'm going to do it. And it will make me better. And you know who's going to panic?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, you got to know she's counting to 4, Chante.
Yeah, because there are times, because
you
our dynamic is so perfect in that her immediate speaking lets me have my time to process. So when she gets off calls, like she did this yesterday to me, she had to get off a call in the middle of it. And then they ask a question and I'm like, okay, actually I'm still processing, and she wasn't there. So I had to start speaking. Oh my word. It was really stressful for me.
Well, and I don't like really uncomfortable, awkward situations.
You process 4 seconds of silence as rejection.
Yeah. I do. She does. So I will be a filler where I'll be like, oh, wow, okay.
Just notice, Susan, that every time you ask a question, go back and listen. Who answers first?
I noticed it as we were going through, and you jump in right away just talking, and then you get to your point.
Yep.
Yeah, and then you always come a little later. It's really fascinating. You
and
guys
it's
are
how
fascinating.
we roll on stage too, and people are always like, "How do you guys know who's going to talk next?" But it's how we naturally work together.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do feel like it does feel odd when I don't.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You guys just got to hold hands. 1, 2, 3, 4,
go.
Well, and sometimes I really do it purposely though, where I'm like, I'm just gonna let Chante take this one. I feel really tired right now
because you've been talking the whole time.
You didn't say anything.
I know, and then I'm stressed about it.
But I'm like, I just let you.
Okay, early bird or night owl?
Night owl.
Night owl.
I knew it.
Yeah.
Between the two of them, favorite kid. Between the 6 of them, I guess I should say, favorite kid. Who's your favorite kid?
Is that even answerable?
Guys always seem to have an answer for it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, well,
I'm like, honestly, like, I have nothing to say, Susan.
I don't think I have a favorite, but I do have one that is like owns my heart and soul.
Is it your own, or is it one of Alexis's?
It's hers.
Yeah.
It's her number 2. She knows
he can do no wrong in her eyes.
He's perfect to me. And we just have this like bond. But here's the reality of it. I lost my oldest. They were the same age. And so he filled something for me, and he was my therapy. Like every day I left the hospital with empty arms after my baby passed away, and I just held her baby. And so there is a connection and a bond that is unreal.
He healed you.
Yeah, he did.
And sometimes it is really hard to discipline that child when his auntie is around.
Yeah.
Because it like hurts her heart. She can't even handle
Leave
it.
him alone.
Yeah.
Alexis.
And I'm like, oh, no. We cannot raise a human that does not understand this.
No, it's fine. I'm to the point with Hattie where I'm like, her roommates are going to beat it out of her. Like, I'm done.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, life is a teacher.
Yeah. And right now it's just like relationship and trust,
Yeah.
And so she's got that relationship and trust, and then you can be the disciplinarian.
I mean, she does. Yeah. And it is nice because sometimes they will tell her things, my 2 older kids, that they feel really comfortable telling her, and they're afraid because they know I'll be like, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
And so I do feel like it's a nice balance. And I do feel like every person deserves to have someone that just is so in their corner and loves them. And I think she provides that for my kids.
Well, honestly, I'm obsessed with all of her children, though. Yeah. Like, that's just...
And they know that. I love them all. And I think they're all great. But I really am like, I take it really seriously. Like, I've got to raise good humans, good citizens. Like, I don't want my daughter-in-laws coming back to me and being like, hey... You really should have worked on this with your child. She can
feel that pressure because I'm not raising them, so I can just obsess over them.
And, Will you feel that pressure for my kids?
I will. I don't know why. I really feel nervous. And maybe it's like in college living with roommates. I'm like, did their mothers not prepare them for this stage of life?
No, I feel that with my own children. Like, that urgency to teach them how to be good humans, Yeah.
Well, good job. Alexis and Chante, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. You guys are amazing.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you for having us. We love talking to you always.